Thanks. Now, Simone Slattery here. I work at GSA Insurance Brokers. Obviously, we're your current insurance brokers for all the policies for members. I think this is our third year now working with RAV, and we love it. And we're still making changes to coverage provisions and working really hard sort of in the background to try and make sure we're capturing the full scope of needs for all members. I suppose that said, given we have 3 policies that we need to go through, I might just dive in. I suppose the one that we probably get questions about the most is the public liability. Now, the public liability is there to protect you as an organisation and also as an individual sort of director or volunteer or employee of the organisation as well. For anything that you may be involved in or have created that has caused an injury or property damage to a third party. Now, it's important to probably be mindful of the fact that it's covering third party injury and third party property damage. That doesn't mean it's covering any injury or property damage to the individuals of the organisation or the members of the organisation. So they're different insurance policies altogether. So this is very much third-party property damage. So if your organisation is holding an event, whether it be in your premises or you've created a travelling festival or you're doing, a 3-day exhibition or an installation of sorts, if you have an attendee at that event, or we'll go with event as the word, if you have an individual that injures themselves or something that you have created as part of, say, an installation, falls and hurts someone or their property, let's say it knocks their phone out of their hand and their phone is rendered unusable, that's what the intention of this policy is there to cover. It's not covering any personal injury to yourselves or any members of the organisation that is involved in creating the event. So we've tried to really create a really wide range of coverage provisions for all members and capture exactly what it is that you are doing and the events that you're hosting or the services that you're providing, in order to make sure that the public liability and product liability policy is like full wide ranging and captures the full breadth of coverage needs. So this is why when we're sort of asking you the insurance information on the renewal questionnaires, why we do ask quite a lot, because we want to make sure we're getting absolutely everything and creating the best possible coverage for you. You'll sort of note on your certificate of currency that it covers a whole host of events. It's not limited to those individually listed things. We can also include additional things, or if you want something specifically listed on your certificate, we're happy to sort of go back to the insurer and do that. Some things aren't going to be able to be covered, but we do like to do our best to try and make sure we're doing everything. And sort of capturing as much as possible. So this is, workshops that you might be hosting or creating any performances. If you're running studios, galleries, as I said before, installations, so temporary works. That's really what we're sort of looking to cover from an organisation standpoint. But if you feel that what's listed on your certificate isn't capturing what you're actually doing, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to renegotiate things on your behalf, and that would generally be done on a case-by-case basis. And then, if it came up enough, then we can look to work it into the policy for everyone. What I do want to probably highlight the most from this is the nature of the policy and how claims work on it. This public liability is different to other policies that you have. So I want to highlight the difference between, say, the association liability and the public liability and voluntary workers. So the nature of the policy for public liability and voluntary workers, but we'll stick to public liability for now, it's occurrence-based policy. So you're covered for incidents that happen during the policy period, regardless of when the claim or the complaint is made. So if you host an event and someone injures themselves at that event on the 10th of October 2025, and then you're notified in 8 months' time, the policy that's in place at 8 months is not the policy that you claim on. It's the policy that was in place at the time that you hosted the event and the injury or the property damage occurred. So we need to be really mindful of that, because, as I said, there are different styles of insurance policies and how a claim is viewed. So it's the policy that's in place at the time of the event, not the time that you are notified of an issue, unless they are one and the same. So that's just something to sort of be mindful of. There are some things that we know relate more so to organisation members than sort of the individual members of regional arts, and that is when you're hosting workshops or you have government contracts or you're getting grants from the government. Sometimes they do ask you to have betrayal of trust coverage. Now, there's an exclusion under our public liability policy for abuse. So that would exclude the betrayal of trust cover that the contract is asking from you. So we can source that elsewhere, but for the nature of this policy that we're speaking about, abuse is not covered in any way, shape, or form, whether that's verbal, physical, sexual, assault, battery, any sort of kind of violence. It means that the policy won't respond to the claim at all. It's a blanket and very absolute exclusion on it. So it means that, any compensation is not claimable, any defense cost is not claimable. So want to sort of make sure that that is highlighted, because I think that there used to be some sort of coverage under that, but it wasn't necessarily necessary for every member. So we've kind of changed that. So we can still provide you with a policy that will cover your betrayal of trust if that's something that comes up in a contract or from a government agency that you're sort of doing some work with. We can provide that cover. We just have a different insurer that we need to go to, and the cost will be slightly different to this public liability policy that you sort of opt into with RAV. Another thing is probably more relevant to organisations is the event endorsement that we have listed on the policy. The biggest one being the number of attendees that are allowed at an event. So there's a cap on this cover, which is 5,000 attendees. Now, that doesn't mean 5,000 attendees over a 3-day event or a 4-day event or even a 2-week event. It means 5,000 attendees at any one time. So you can have 20,000 people walk through the gates of let's call it a festival that you're holding, 20,000 people over the course of 4 or 5 days, and that's fine. It just means that at any one time there needs to be the policy will only respond if there is a maximum of 5,000 attendees at that event. Same goes if you have alcohol being served at the event. They want to make sure that you have security present, that you have adequate staffing, RSAs are being sort of adhered to, and the likes of that. And obviously alcohol isn't at every event, but it is even at gallery openings. There are obviously, I know I've been to a lot, there are wine sort of roving and waiters sort of taking that stuff around. So when you are hosting an event where there is alcohol permitted, we want to make sure that there is, relevant security, RSAs being adhered to. And if you have any questions on that, please let us know. Or if you're not sure whether the policy will cover you because you are serving alcohol, please let us know and we can, confirm it for you in writing, give you a bit of peace of mind. But yeah, so that's a parameter that the insurer has kind of put in place around that. Another one is pyrotechnics. It's not a blanket no, it's a potential we can cover. It means that if you are hosting an event where there is pyrotechnics, that you have a fully qualified third party doing that, and you are not directly involved in it aside from, creating, sort of hiring them basically. So it's not going to cover the organization directly for it, but it will cover your vicarious liability. So anything that you're found liable for in the event of that. However, we need to make sure that we refer that to the insurer and we get them to confirm it for us, because it does form part of the, I suppose, exclusion or parameter of the policy. So where there are events where that is going to be an inclusion, it doesn't happen all that often, but does happen. Please let us know, reach out to us, and we can get it confirmed for you. Another thing would probably be participation. I know I've been to a lot of sort of festivals or events that are being hosted where there are performances, and within those performances there's sometimes public participation, or they go out into the crowd and sort of have those sort of things. That's fine. The policy was designed with that in mind, knowing that there are a lot of performance artists and also performance troupes sort of win this, whether that's a choir, a dance, or acting, or things like that. We know that there's public participation, which is probable, and so the insurer has approved that. However, you really just want to make sure that you're not putting them in harm's way, and you're not allowing them to participate in something that requires skill. They may be skilled in it, but if you are doing a circus performance, for instance, and you are juggling fire batons, then if you hand one over to a third-party participant and they injure themselves, that will not be claimable under the policy. So there's a little bit of sort of common sense in here, but also, we'll just call it common sense. The other thing that is on here in the current policy, which is an exclusion, is infectious diseases. Now, this one, it's a strange endorsement, an exclusion that has been placed on the policy, not only by our insurer on this cover, but by just about every other insurer in the market. And this came about after COVID-19. So basically, everyone was paying out a ridiculous amount of money, or insurers were paying out money, or having to decline a lot of claims. We won't go into that, but there was a lot of claims sort of coming out of this, and so a lot of insurers needed to sort of pivot how they did things. And in order to stay afloat, basically, they said, we're not covering anything that comes out of an infectious disease. So any damages that you may be liable to pay, any fines that may be imposed, or any sort of liability that will fall on yourselves, the policy is not going to pick up if it's COVID-19 or any of its variants, or a declared pandemic or epidemic declared by the World Health Organization or government authority. So there's a couple of things to sort of be mindful under the policy, more so for an organization, but as a whole, we've really tried to make sure it encompasses all the needs of an organization representing artists or artists themselves. So if there's something that you're not 100% sure of, please let us know, and we're happy to review coverage or let you know whether it does fall within the current parameters of the policy and it's just not as highlighted, because insurance policies, when you do read through them, can sometimes talk in circles. They're not particularly clear sometimes, and they'll reference different policy sections and numbers, and you have to sort of read through 45 different things. So we're happy to help with that. Given 217. I might just move over to the association liability insurance, and then we'll sort of come back to any questions you might have about public liability. So association liability, it's a composite product. It's designed specifically for associations where you're a not-for-profit, where finances might be slightly tighter, so it is rated lower than other policies. It encompasses a whole range of different coverages, so directors and officers liability. So this basically would protect committee members, office holders, board members, and the likes of that, directors of the business or the organisation, for any decisions that they have made while acting on behalf of the organisation that maybe have been detrimental. If there's financial mismanagement of the organisation's funds, that's a claimable sort of event under it. It's basically protects the individuals if they are named in a claim against the organisation, but specifically names one specific director themselves. So it does cover the organisation as well, but there's two different subsections. So I just wanted to make that clear, that there's organisational liability and directors and officers liability. Now, directors and officers is for the individual directors and anything they're named in. Organisation is for the organisation, anything it's named in. They can go hand in hand in the event of a claim as well. It's not always divided, but we do see them separated out. So just wanted to point that out. Another one is, and probably the biggest claim, this and crime are probably the biggest claimed upon sections, employment practices liability. That is allegations of any sort of employment issues. So that could be unfair dismissal, it could be harassment, it could be discrimination. Anything that you would basically go to, what's it called, the government regulatory body. We know what I'm talking about. Anything you go to that for that and make a complaint about for handling of your contract or your role within the organisation, that's generally what the employment practices liability is there to cover. The other one being another most claimed upon section is the crime cover. So that covers loss from internal fraud or theft from an employee or a committee member. That could be money, it could be sort of embezzlement of funds, or it could be theft of stocks or belongings that are sort of housed within organizations' premises. So if you have 20 computers, let's say, sitting in your office, and you found that 5 computers have been stolen, it's going to cover things like that as well. It's not from third-party theft, which would be more so a property policy or a business package policy, which would cover theft of property. This is specifically when it's related to employees of the organisation. So if an employee has stolen or has embezzled funds, that's what this kind of crime is designed to cover. Another one that is covered under this section, under this policy, is statutory liability. So that's for any fines, penalties imposed on the organisation for any breaches of legislation. So that could be employment law, privacy law, work health and safety breaches, those sort of things. That one's probably not that claimed upon, but it's definitely an important section to have in the policy because fines are being handed down a lot more frequently these days. So it's definitely an important coverage to hold. And probably the more lesser known inclusion of these policies, but still relevant, is tax audit cover. So that covers the association if you have investigation costs incurred as a result of a tax audit being imposed on the organisation, or tax audit from a sort of fees from a tax agent after you have received a notice to comply with a finding from the ATO, or even just an investigation from the ATO. It's a smaller limit to the policy rather than sort of the main overarching policy limit, which in this case is $5 million. Tax audit investigation cover would generally have about $100,000 available. I don't think I've ever seen a tax audit claim that has gone to more than 30K. So 100K is generally a sustainable limit to have. I will need to double check. I think Rav might have 250K, but I can sort of confirm that later. What isn't covered under an association liability is deliberate or illegal acts. Any sort of deliberate or malicious acts that have been sustained to the organisation by, let's say, an individual director or committee member. Anything that obviously it's a little bit of a grey area when it comes to that sort of subsection in it, because theft, you would argue, theft of stock or theft of money is a deliberate act. But what it's kind of trying to say is, if a claim is made against the organisation from someone outside the organisation because they think that, let's say, Regional Arts Victoria as an organisation, not that they're doing this, but let's say that they have mismanaged the organisation's funds, then the policy will respond to that. And that is not a deliberate act per se, but it could be sort of seen as a deliberate act, but sometimes it's not all that intentional. It's a little grey. I'm probably not explaining it correctly, but I can also sort of provide a lot more information after the fact. I have a whole range of questions that Rav have provided me, so I can sort of add that onto them and explain it a little bit better than what that just was, because a bit convoluted. The association liability policies, they're great policies to have. They encompass a lot of different things. They cover committee members, chairs, secretaries, administrators, volunteers, staff, and the organisation itself. So it's really covering a whole range of people. It's created with a lower price point to be able to provide all of those coverage provisions to an organisation that is set up as a sort of not-for-profit or has more limited access to funds. Whereas if you had, say, like a Fortune 500 company, they would have a standalone directors and officers insurance liability, and then they would have a standalone employment practices liability. So it groups it all together to really give access to those smaller sort of organizations. As I mentioned earlier with the public liability, the association liability and the nature of it is different to public liability. So public liability was occurrence-based, and that is the policy that's in place at the time of the event or the injury occurring to the third party. Association liability is different. So this one is claims made and notified. So what that means is the policy that's in place at the time you are notified of the issue is the policy that responds. So even if the issue or the loss was sustained 3 years prior, it's the policy in place at the time that you get notified of an issue. And when that issue arises, you need to notify straight away, because an insurer can potentially believe that they have become prejudiced if the notification to them is delayed. So we need to be mindful of the fact that this one's different to public liability. It's claims made and notified, and it's the policy that's in place at the time you are notified of an issue arising, and you notified straight away. So in this instance, you would notify GSA. We would have our claims team handle this for you, and they would basically liaise and argue on your behalf with the insurer, and we'd work to sort of get the claim paid. I don't look after claims, so hopefully no one has any issues with them. But if we have any questions on claims, I'm happy to sort of refer them to our claims team. But yeah, so it's claims made and notified. Notify as soon as you become aware. Even if you think it's not going to go anywhere, or you're not 100% sure if it's a claimable event, just call us, let us know, and we'll tell you if it is or not. Most of the time, it will be. and we have claims notified to us years later, and some insurers will be well within their rights to decline it because they've become prejudiced because the costs to now proceed with that claim have increased astronomically because of the delay in notifying, the delay in getting sort of adequate legal representation, and someone really pushing it along. So notify as soon as you're aware. If you're not sure if you should, let us know. Give us a call. I'm happy to walk you through it. We do this every single day. Even with other clients that we have, everyone just calls and says, I'm not really sure if I need to notify this. Just give us a call and we can sort of run through it with you and let you know what to do. Now, the other policy that we have for members, which I might have Patrick sit in with me on this one because he's probably a little bit better versed on this coverage than I am, but I'll give it a go. It's the voluntary workers cover. So if you use volunteers as an organisation, this is what we have put in place to cover any injury to those volunteers that they sustain while they are acting as volunteers for your organisation. It doesn't cover, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe it covers, their journey to the event that they're volunteering at, but it should cover them while they are at the event.
Yeah, so just on that, it does include direct travel.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
include
for
on the
that.
scope of cover. So any direct travel to any authorized activities is covered.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for that. That's good to know. It does that. So it covers permanent disability, injuries, accidental death, though Patrick can delve a little bit more into that one because I'm not still confused as to how that part works and who claims upon it if, the volunteer passes away. It has weekly benefits for injuries sustained and non-Medicare medical costs. So let's say one of your volunteers, sustains an injury. They have out-of-pocket medical expenses that they have that they want to sort of claim. They have taxi fares to get themselves if they can't drive, or if they have at-home help that they need to have because they're sort of unable to sort of do things, or if they have sort of additional help that they require to sort of get them back on their feet. That's generally what the policy is designed to cover. So you get your initial sort of weekly benefits, and then even if you can return to work, but you return on a sort of reduced capacity, or you've gone from full-time to part-time, it can still cover you for a portion of any sort of loss to earnings that may be resultant from that. But Pat, I might let you delve a bit deeper.
Yeah. So just to kind of explain a lump sum benefit, it's just basically like a life insurance policy. Basically what happens is in the event that a volunteer does kind of suffer a disability, a permanent disability, or a accidental death, in order to sort of, I guess, settle the costs of like a mortgage, etc., there is a lump sum payable to make sure your family is looked after you've sort of died. And in terms of weekly benefits injury, if you are working on behalf of the organization and as a result you're injured and can no longer work at a normal capacity at your job, the weekly benefit will pay 85% of your normal salary. So the way they calculate it is they kind of take your 12 months of salary beforehand and they kind of average it into a weekly. And then they'll pay you out a weekly benefit to yourself, sort of cover the cost of the salary that you would have earned.
Great, thanks, Pat. Told you he was more knowledgeable on this one than I am. I think I might jump to some questions now. I know that we have a list that Rav have sort of sent us through, and there's some that have come through on the chat. Were there any pressing ones on the chat that you guys can see?
Simone, there's a couple of questions there about contractors, and I thought maybe you could sort of talk about people who are paid fees, how you kind of enter into a contract with them, who's covering the public liability, and maybe just touch on that hold harmless question that's in the form.
Yeah, that's fine. So look, this coverage is sort of dependent on which policy we're sort of looking at. Independent contractors generally aren't covered under an organisation's policy. There's normally a stipulation within a policy wording that talks about whether independent contractors are included. It will generally provide coverage under public liability and under the sort of organisation or association liability. It will provide cover for the organisation that is an insured name on the policy. It will then also drop down to their employees and contractors. But where the difference lies is the contractor is covered because there's a direct contract with that organisation. Where it changes into independent contractors is where the policy changes and coverage is rescinded. So independent contractors aren't able to sort of claim under this policy, and we generally want an independent contractor to hold their own insurance, and they should be holding their own insurance because they're working for a whole range of different organizations, and their liability shouldn't fall on yourselves. So this is why we ask the question in the form, in the insurance questionnaire form, do you engage contractors, and do you also ask them if they have their own public liability coverage as well? We want to make sure that you're not taking on all responsibility where it should be shared. Now that sort of leads us into, I suppose, that hold harmless question, which tends to create the most chatter. It's an odd one in the way it's phrased, and insurance often has very peculiar sayings for things. But in a nutshell, what it's asking is, are you as an individual, or are you as the organization, assuming all liability in the event of a claim, even if some of that liability should be apportioned to someone else? So let's say you have you're hosting an event and you have a whole range of different suppliers coming in to, provide food and things like that, or you have, people coming in to install artworks or help you with that. You want to make sure that when you have a contract that you're sort of putting in place with them, if you are, that you are not assuming every ounce of liability and that they are taking their own. Now, it's not written into every single contract, but it is more increasingly written into contracts that one party tries to reduce their liability entirely and pass it all over to the others. That's something to always be mindful of when you are reviewing your contracts. Look at those clauses specifically around insurance, and if you're unsure, if you don't understand what it says, or you just need a little bit of extra reassurance or guidance, please let us know. We do this every single day. We're not lawyers, so we can't give you legal advice on these things, but what we can say is, if you have a contract written in there that has you taking on all responsibility for all loss that could be associated with an event you're hosting or holding or created, that shouldn't be in there. And you need to either push back on it or let us know, and we can let the insurer know. It's not always a blanket exclusion, but a lot of insurers do not like to provide coverage for assumed liability. So it's that probably one of the biggest takeaways from today is to check your contracts and make sure if there is a clause in the insurance section that you're not sure of, just let us know, and we will look it over for you and sort of tell you whether that fits. One of the questions that arose in a previous session with the individuals, but I think is very relevant for yourselves as well, is if you have if you've created something and you're passing it over to another commissioning body, probably not as relevant, but I think I just want to touch on this in case you're sort of doing things on the side that you need to know about. If you have, for instance, a sculpture or something like that your organization has created or commissioned, and it's being passed on to another person for their ownership, liability would generally stop at that point. So you no longer need to hold public liability insurance past the point that you have handed over that that item to the person. The only time where that might shift is if it's found to have a defect or faulty workmanship through your negligence. Then the public liability would sort of still fall on yourselves, but generally it would go over to the new owner, and that is normally written in there by way of a contract. So check your contractual requirements and clauses that are in there, and have a look at those. Independent contractors, yep, as I said, no, they are not covered under the policy, and we can't get them covered. So this is why, yeah, as I said before, this is why we ask if these contractors have public liability insurance, because we want to try and limit your exposure, and the insurer always wants to see that you are mitigating any potential losses for yourselves. Let's have a look at the other questions that have come through.
There's a question here related to the association liability cover, Simone. Does employment practices liability cover the cost of seeking legal advice as well as any compensation ordered?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The policies cover legal defence costs. They cover investigation costs, and they cover compensation that you may be found liable for. So yeah, all of these policies will, well, not the voluntary workers, but the public liability and the association liability will cover the legal costs associated with defending a claim or clearing a name. So yeah, that absolutely, and apologies if I didn't touch on that earlier, but yeah, definitely covers investigation costs. I have, and legal defence costs, I have a different client, different setup to yourselves, but they have a workplace related claim that has come through. We notified the insurer, which happens to be Jewel, which is the same as your insurer. They, within 2 days, appointed a legal representative to defend them at the investigation hearings with Fair Work. So that's kind of how the policy would work. And then the insurer would just ask you to contribute the the excess, before they sort of made any claim payouts, but they will advance you those defence costs before anything else sort of continues.
Leanne is asking about the volunteers workers policy. Is it a separate additional policy to the usual annual public liability and membership? So just so everyone on the call knows, when you join as a Regional Arts Victoria organisation member, you automatically have access to our volunteer workers cover and the association liability cover. So those come packaged as part of your membership, and the public liability cover is an additional policy that we have available for you. So that's what you add on and pay a separate amount for. There's another question as part of this, which is, are there minimum hours a week that a volunteer works to be entitled to benefits such as permanent disability? That would be great if we could answer that, Patrick. And also another thing about that is just how the organisations might record who their volunteers are, and if that's an essential sort of part of making a claim against that policy would be a good thing to.
Yep. So there are no minimum hours required for a volunteer to claim under policy. As long as they're conducting unpaid voluntary work on your behalf, they are covered under the policy. There's no kind of maximum amount of volunteers you can have covered as well. Just with regards to kind of the best practice, there is no requirement under the policy as well to maintain records or just make sure that your volunteers are kind of registered. But just as a best practice measure, we do kind of recommend identifying individuals, kind of outlining what their role is and kind of the scope of their works, just because in the event of a claim, an insurer will likely ask for that information, and it's kind of best to have that on hand to sort of present to them as soon as possible.
Thanks, Pat.
Excellent.
There was just one other question that I saw come through before this. I think I've just lost it. Oh, yeah. What is the best insurance for a not-for-profit theatre company rehearsing and performing at a school? So what's the best insurance for them to have? If you are doing anything where there's potential for children, we probably want to look at maybe having working with children checks in place. If it's outside of hours and there's no potential for that, you probably don't need to worry about it. It's not a requirement of the insurer to take a look at that, but it's something that they could potentially ask. Outside of that, you probably just want public liability cover. That's probably the biggest thing that you would need. If you damage property of theirs through your activities, then that's what this policy would pick up. And if you had props around in the, let's say, school hall, you left props around, someone tripped over them and injured themselves, that's what this policy, the public liability policy, would pick up as well. So that would probably be the main one that you need. Then you can probably take on a little bit of property coverage for yourself. Now, property coverage is not something that we currently have in place for RAV members, but it's something that we are looking at with Regional Victoria at the moment. We're sort of doing a bit of a deep dive into who needs it, how much do we need it, and what scope of coverage we can provide, and also obviously the rate, because everyone wants a bit of a discounted rate. And the other one we're also looking at is professional indemnity. Now, the Association Liability policy does cover professional indemnity to a degree. It's slightly watered down, and it's basically there to cover your advocacy work that you are doing for your members, or any sort of maybe workshops that you're hosting. If I don't know if CPD points are a thing. If you're hosting workshops and the advice that you've provided is found to be incorrect or negligent, then that's where the professional indemnity here in that policy will pick it up. But if you are probably more centered maybe towards the individuals, but if you are doing work outside of your organization, then the professional indemnity is really good if you are hosting workshops, if you're correcting artworks, restoring artworks, if you're offering advice or services for a fee, or if you're sort of consulting in any way, shape or form, a professional indemnity policy is a really good one to have. We're looking at really cost-effective coverage in that. It would be a shared limit among members, I believe, as well. And so, I suppose we're trying to gauge just the needs of members and, who wants it, who needs it, and what they need it for. We're trying to compile a big list. So if that's something that resonates with you, please let us know. And we can, push this through maybe a little bit quicker. But that is a policy that would cover any sort of defence costs and compensation, or any PR expenses, for instance, if you, everyone's on social media these days throwing out their own personal reviews. So policies are there to cover PR costs as well, which is just an added layer of protection. Now, there's still a whole bunch of questions. I know we're out of time, but there's a whole bunch of questions that have been pre-submitted. I've already started working through those, putting my answers in, so I will share them with Rav. And if there are any other questions, we're happy to answer them. And I promise that Patrick will answer the voluntary workers questions and not me.
Simone, there is just one thing that a couple of people have asked, so maybe we could answer that for everyone in one go. It's just about the public liability cover and whether it covers members of the organisations that have joined the policy. So it's the members of our organisation members.
Yeah, so that's what our intention of the policy was. It was to provide coverage for the organisation and the members. However, we know that because we ask you in the form to list how many members you have, that's generally why the insurer wants to know, to sort of pick up those things. If you have 700 or 800 members under your organisation, it's probably one that you want to take off this, and you want to take your own policy, because your exposure is a lot higher. but it is there to cover the organisation and the organisation's members as well. So yeah, but be mindful of sort of the size. And I know that we already sort of have a limit on the turnover that we can provide cover for under this public liability. But as that's not to say that we can't provide the coverage outside of this facility. We can still place a different policy for you, generally with another insurer that predominantly does work for not-for-profit organisations. So their rates are pretty good as well.
Thank you for that. Over to you, Nell.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thanks so much, Simone and Patrick, for all your help and advocacy and support of our members. Really appreciate it. And we think the insurance is a great product. So we hope you all do too. And if you have any other questions, you can send them to membership@rav.net.au, and we'll try to direct you to GSA. Also on our website are GSA's contact details and a whole bunch of FAQs and resources. So have a look there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.